Okay. My name is Nolan Hack. I am a black activist from the city of Los Angeles, California.
I am Derrick. I am a black writer and black activist in the city of Austin, Texas. I am studying information systems and also getting a MBA.
Anne, you want to go next?
Okay. I'm Remy. I'm on the East Coast. I work with Not Your Mascot and various Native American issues.
Okay. Julie?
My name is Julie Dye. I'm a Pokagon Band, Potawatomi, and Wappo Island First Nation Potawatomi citizen, and I live in Jackson, Michigan. I work with the Michigan Coalition Against Racism in Sports and Media, and currently working with high schools in Michigan, Mascot schools.
Tanja?
Hi, I'm Tanja Burkhard. I'm a black German educator, I would say, from currently at Pittsburgh, and my work centers the black diaspora, specifically women.
Let's see. Kima?
Hi, my name is Kima Nieves. I'm Manapamai from Virginia. I work in healthcare, but I do activism pretty much any other time.
Nice. Okay. I've lost count. Walelu?
I'm Walelu Goodman. I'm currently in Boston and will be transitioning to the West Coast in about the next year to start my master's PhD at Pacifica in depth psychology. I am an Indigenous activist and looking to see more solidarity in between minority groups, because I think us talking together is a lot louder and a lot more clear than us trying to speak separately.
I think that is the perfect segue into tonight's discussion. There, for whatever reason, within the last couple weeks, has been a lot of infighting between our two people, and Walelu showed me a tweet by a wonderful Native activist that people jumped on, even though it's true. Kelsey Darko, she tweeted today, everyone who is not Native in the Americas benefits off of the genocide, exploitations, and oppression of Native peoples. And she was then called anti-black for saying such a thing. And that's become a theme of late. And the indigenous people on this discussion, I'd like to please ask, kind of start us off with that topic.
Can you please say again what her tweet was? I didn't see it on the timeline today. What exactly did she say again?
No problem. The exact tweet was, my computer struggles to load for some reason. The exact tweet, everyone who is not Native in the Americas benefits off of the genocide, exploitation, and oppression of Native peoples.
And people were saying it was anti-black.
Yep.
Did anybody give any rationale beyond it just being anti-black? Like, was there anything particular Was it just the non-native part? Was it the exploitation part? Like, what exactly was it, or was it the entire statement?
I feel that Will had the best response, in my opinion. But I don't know if everyone's read kind of what his reply was.
I didn't get a chance to.
Oh, okay.
I didn't get to see it.
He essentially kind of acknowledged that, yes, everyone does benefit from removal in certain ways, but he just kind of, in a really nuanced way, I felt, kind of went through and kind of just described the ways in which those of us who are the descendants of slaves, while we did the labor and while some of us might even be able to opt into the system, how most of us actually don't see the benefits from the labor that we go on to do. And so I feel that the anti-Black comment might have been more towards not, I guess, in a nuanced way, trying to differentiate the descendants of slaves from their slave masters.
Actually, I think that's a really great point, and I think the key word that you're saying there is nuance. In these conversations, I mean, I know on Twitter it's really, really difficult to get into these specific nuances just because of the frickin' word count and whatnot, but these nuances, they are really important to have. And I see what Will is saying in terms of, like, yeah, Indigenous people have been exploited, but so have Black people, and it's in different ways, and that distinction has to be made. And I think what I'm hearing a lot on Twitter nowadays, when people are saying a statement is anti-Black, I think the underlying issue is they want more nuanced conversation. They want people to acknowledge that, their communities have been exploited as well. And I think that would solve a lot of our communication in terms of these things, if we just acknowledge that.
I agree. But I also do agree that everyone, in some fashion, does benefit from that removal. Like, I grew up in an area that obviously has deep ties to Native presence, and the fact that I grew up without a firm knowledge of that and who those people are, or even in a system that doesn't encourage me to know who those peoples are, that's something that needs to be rectified and something that needs to be talked about more openly within the Black community. And there's nothing wrong with saying that or pointing that out.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
I agree also.
Yeah, it's not saying that no one else is oppressed or has been, damaged by racism or genocide or anything else. They're just saying that, there is some benefit for the removal of our people from the land and the, taking of the land and all the benefits that the land provides. I think it's just kind of like a blanket statement, but it's not saying that no one else has also been injured.
Right.
I'm actually coming to this conversation. If you hear me typing, it's just because I kind of want to get notes. I'm really looking forward to hearing kind of more Native opinions on Native erasure and ways that we as Black people can take back to our communities and dispel that so that there can be greater solidarity between us.
Sweet.
Well, I'll add, as one of the Black folks on here, that it's a bizarre realization once we understand what's really going on and where we are, because we were stolen from our home. We've been forced to assimilate into a culture hell-bent on crippling us and leaving us in a constant crippled state. But although a lot of black people who do the work that we do, everybody on this panel realizes that, we forget one important thing: the land that we're on is indigenous land.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Totally agree.
Yep.
I think that's probably the point that gets buried and overlooked most often, and I think that's probably the sore spot for a lot of Indigenous people, that and the idea that so many of us are extinct. The fact that that's perpetuated most often, that we are still here. The fact that we have to scream the loudest even over other minority groups, that's what becomes so tiring. We don't want to have to keep ourselves in competition with people that we want to see as allies, because it's not, it's not oppression Olympics. It's not who had it worse, or, how we were oppressed in worse ways than someone else. It's we've all been oppressed by a patriarchal, domineering white system, and the only way any of us is going to get past any of this is if we start seeing commonalities and finding common ground in one another and in our shared experience, and in finding ways to move forward together, instead of, we had it worse, or you had it worse, or whatever that continual colonial narrative ends up being. We're never going to get past any of the real hard stuff unless we get past that. We have to decolonize that part of the conversation, or it's never going to happen. We're never actually going to make any progress. And that's the most insidious part of the system. White people created that dissension when Natives and Black people first started bonding and creating ties and realizing, hey, there's more of us than there are of them. And if we bond together and if we band together, then maybe we could do something to overthrow the system then. The minute they realized it at that point, they began creating dissension, and they created the one-drop rule, and they created, the three-fifths compromise, and they started putting these oppressive systems into place to play us off one another. And the problem is that that's just become more insidious over time. Mm-hmm. So until we really look at that and start breaking into that and breaking that down and realizing what total crap it is and start rejecting it together, we're never going to be able to move past it, to move forward together.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Lenape, and I'm also half Italian, and the Native community still acknowledges their boundaries. If people come onto Lenape land, they ask permission. If I go into somebody else's territory, I'll offer them tobacco and ask permission. It's just like if you invite somebody over to your house, you acknowledge that you're a guest in their house. Mm-hmm. So the same thing, with the Turtle Island or America or whatever you call it. But it's just acknowledging where you are and knowing, the ground you're standing on makes a big difference. So, but that being said, my grandfather was a chief on the East Coast, Chief Bill Thompson, Chief Whippoorwill, and he's always said that the Native people and the Black people, if they stood together, they could get so much further. Martin Luther King gathered the Black people up, and they fought for their rights. The Native people, are a little slower to do that. But if you do it together and you listen to each other and hear everybody out, you can get so much further. So, I mean, that's what needs to be done.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the native way is not to be hostile, but is to be friendly and accepting. And I'm talking pre-contact, because once you have settlers, you know, also known as invaders, things change. You know, the natives weren't as trustworthy. So, you know, but you have to put that aside at some point and just work with each other, and you really have to listen. And I think that's what we have to do, is just find some common ground and know that both sides were oppressed. Other minorities are oppressed. They could be our allies. And, you know, we could just, we need to stop fighting among ourselves. And it is true that, you know, natives have their own history. Blacks have their own history. Nothing was fair.
No.
You know, but you just have to come together and get over that.
Okay.
Right. And going back to the idea of like the land and, you know, being guests in the house and things like that. I think whenever Indigenous people reassert our existence and reassert, you know, our ties to the land, I think that causes a lot of tension, especially for people who were brought here against their will. You know what I mean? Because I think on the upfront, and I could be wrong, so please correct me if I am. I think on the upfront, it gives this feeling like, oh, well, since this is our territory, you're not welcome here. And that's a really common misconception, because for Indigenous people, I don't think we view the land as ownership, more of like a reciprocal relationship. And other people can have that relationship with the land as well. It's just more of acknowledging, and I don't think that's something that's ever made particularly clear in a lot of these discussions. It's kind of just tends to be like this butting of heads, you know, that doesn't acknowledge the other party. It's like, you know, we say like, oh, you know, this is our land, like, you know, we've been here since time immemorial, et cetera, and people are perceived that like, oh, well, you know, we don't have a place here, and that's never the case. At least I've never felt that was the case. Because for the land, it's, for me and for the people that I know, all the other Indigenous people, it's a relationship. It's not ownership. And that idea of ownership is a colonial idea that I think gets pounded into everybody here in America. Like, you know, this is your property, or this is your territory, things like that. And I think that causes a lot of miscommunication in the end, I guess I could say.
Yeah, you are right on that. And the natives didn't believe in land ownership. But it's just like if I were to go to another country, I'm still a guest. You know, and you do try to find out a little bit about the area you're going to. You know, just and it's more about respecting the land than, you know, more than anything. But you know, like it kind of makes me mad when I hear people say, you know, to people that are descendants of slaves, go back home, or you know, you don't belong here. You can't bring a group of people over and then expect them to go home.
Exactly.
You know, they caused the problem in the first place, and now they don't want to deal with the consequences, you know.
Right.
And I think it's unfair to tell people to go home if that's what you did, you know, if that's the history.
Yeah.
I mean, that always bothers me.
Absolutely agreed. They created the problem. They created this as their new home forcibly upon them, and then basically ripped their actual home away. And then you want to tell them to go back? That's not even feasible.
I can.
Yeah.
and not just the land. I mean, they took the completely took the culture away. You know, the languages and the traditions and everything. I mean, just completely stripped them of everything
Exactly.
and
It wasn't
forced them into
just
slavery. Yeah.
It wasn't just indigenous tribes that were decimated and that were extinguished. It was African tribes that were decimated and that were extinguished in the slave trade. So that's horrifying for people to just scream, "Go home." Settlers go home. You want to go there? White people go home. You don't belong here either then.
On the go home.
Exactly. That's a good comeback.
On the go home part, I can speak just as an African descendant person that my only concern with that was always, as I started becoming more educated on these issues, was just how, well, if we needed to go home or if that's how we ultimately had to reconcile this history, the only thing I really ever thought about in that regard was my great-grandmother. Like, my great-grandmother's birthday is tomorrow. She'll be 98. And, like, how can I explain that to her, or how can I have a conversation with her about, you know, being a stolen people on stolen lands? And we're having those conversations. Me and my cousin are actually going to go and interview all the elderly folks in our family, just to get kind of a recollection of their lives in this kind of permanent recorded fashion, because they're kind of passing on to us the roles of the historian. But we'll also be kind of having a conversation. I don't know if they've ever even thought about it in those contexts. I'll be interested in kind of just hearing how they reconcile that history with themselves, or kind of even just what they think about it, because they're not educated people. My great-grandmother, there was no schools for her to go to. One of my ancestors did start a school very shortly after the Civil War, but that shut down. And by the time my grandparents are coming up, there are no regular schools for, you know, people of color. So I think a lot of this ignorance on our part stems from the fact that our ancestors weren't educated on certain topics. There's always been a concerted effort to kind of keep our two communities apart. And our individual histories, I feel, can encourage us to be very insular people. So I know on the part of Black people, I remember being kind of primed as a young man that, you know, you keep family things in the family because explaining them to other groups or other people isn't going to be beneficial, because no one else is going to understand, basically. And we're primed that way as little kids. And so one of the jobs I feel that we as Black artists and Black activists have is to break through that, because I know that deep down what I feel both of our peoples would want is another group that can understand. And I also just wanted to give a warning just to other Black people who might just be getting to know these issues, that please remember that Indigenous people weren't racialized in the exact same ways that we were. So our differences were kind of erased to the point that we became one people, whereas they were not. And so sometimes there can be this ignorance on our part where we do racialize you all as kind of one homogenous group. And so that's why I think the nitpicky things about Native involvement in slavery, where people won't know that, that's specific people, those are specific tribes. You can't, have a conversation about that with just anyone. And even if you are going to have a conversation with a Native group about that history, realize that there are still descendants of those institutions that are still alive and speaking for themselves. So they don't necessarily need you, especially if you're not really connected to that, to come in and kind of just start all kinds of mess.
Thank you for that, Derrick.
Oh.
And that sounds amazing what you're doing with your family. I really, that's incredible.
Oh yeah, it's my great uncle Robert. I can't wait to talk to him because my grandfather knows a lot and my grandmother knows a lot, but my great uncle Robert is kind of like the penultimate historian. So I can't wait to hear what he has to say. He's my grandfather's uncle. that's weird to think that my grandfather's uncle is still alive and here present to speak to.
That's incredible.
You know, and if we focus on the similarities, I mean, and just the problems alone, we have many of the same issues in our communities. I mean, as a native person, we have differences between the dark-skinned people or the ones that can pass for white. I mean, they have almost, I don't know, just a lot of issues with that alone. We have substance abuse, drug abuse issues. You know, so we have a lot of battling the same problems in our communities, and so let alone infighting. You know, we don't need to have a continuance of fighting amongst minorities along with that, because I mean that will get us nowhere.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the underlying fact is so many of these problems were created by outside influences, or I should say influence. This system, you know, the crack was not put in our communities by ourselves.
Right.
But there.
No, that was a calculated move.
Yeah. The meth, the alcohol was not put on reservations by Native people. They were put there by the government.
The guns.
The guns are both, this whole, it's hard to describe because it keeps going. It's been going on for so long, and the pain is so fresh. It's hard to get over. I feel like I'm talking to white people when I'm saying this, but just from my own soul, my own heart, it's hard to move on from past trauma that I wasn't even personally in or took part in, but then to have the same stuff still happening, it makes it that much more difficult to, okay, tomorrow is the next day and we're going to move on to that. There is no next day for either of us, and it makes no sense for me, in my mind, for us to be apart, because I'm trying to be careful here of not using anything that would sound like a Press Olympics, but at least in terms of the history of this country, no two people have been through what we've been through.
Exactly.
And
very true.
The amount of demonic, hellish situations we've been put in and continually put in to go at each other. I know it's cliche to say this, but it's exactly what they want.
Yep.
But then at the same time, it doesn't make any sense, because we're getting hit by the same punch, same hand, and
as an example to that, Nolan, the family who owned a section of my family, they had one of the largest collection of slaves. They came into South Carolina. They were very, very involved. There's like over 3 generations of them. So they were very involved in some very famous court cases, Supreme Court cases, that ultimately go on to like eject the Cherokees and various peoples from Georgia, from those lands there. And then also what the specific court case that I'm talking about, I'll have to look it up, but it's very, very important in terms of both Native and Black histories, because essentially what it means is that these lands that were gotten by theft, and there's actually a Supreme Court case that says the Cherokees can stay, they're not supposed to be removed. This is like the history of Andrew Jackson and such. We know that they're removed anyway, but that court case, that Supreme Court case, is very, very important because it also involves slavery. Up until that time period, there had been some successful slaves who had been able to sue for their freedom on the basis that they had converted to Christianity, because it used to be a thing that you couldn't enslave other Christians. But that court case essentially ends both that practice, and it also ensures native removal. And so I've been learning about that. These are the Yazoo land frauds. I've been learning about that over the course of this year and have been really struck at how impacted both of our people have been by the same people.
Mm-hmm. I think that's why it's so important that if we stop looking across at each other and seeing anti-Native, anti-Black, and seeing that dissension, and start looking at each other with empathy and understanding that it's a connected history. And it's a connected history in so many ways, because it's all the same oppression at the end of the day, then we'll get so much further than we have. We could start healing. We could start healing on both sides.
It's Fletcher v. Peck. That's the Supreme Court case. Fletcher v. Peck. It's 1810.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, I think Natives and Blacks are actually more alike than they realize. Natives were also enslaved,
Yep.
and as the Black slaves were being shipped in, they were shipping the Natives out to go work in, in other countries, and shipping them overseas to be like maids in houses in Europe, that area. So, and then on the plantations, they were breeding Natives and Blacks together to make a better slave. Because the Natives that were resistant, to, different. Well, actually, I should say they were used to the weather here, and the diseases and that were here. I mean, there wasn't as much that was the diseases that were brought in, but so they were breeding them.
Yep.
Oh, I didn't know until I was 27, 28. Rosa Parks is half Indigenous.
Me either. I didn't know that. Yeah.
And nobody, like, if you walk down the street, like, you ask somebody who Rosa Parks is, they'll probably tell you, but then, she's actually Indigenous too.
Yeah.
First of all, they'd ask, what is Indigenous? But then they'd go, what, she's Native American? Really?
I didn't know that until very recently either.
Isn't she's Cherokee?
I'm honestly not sure.
I believe that's what she was.
Cherokee,
yeah.
It's that right there.
But I do think that's, and I just want to reiterate for other Black people, that we weren't racialized in the same way. And so kind of studying the different ways in which we were racialized, I feel greater solidarity will come about. Because there are differences, and that's what I also love about Twitter, like the retweets. Like, you can just retweet, you don't have to speak on behalf of anybody. Like, you can just amplify someone's voice instead of speaking. Because sometimes I do feel uncomfortable. Like, I feel like you could take a college course on both of our people and be completely still ignorant.
Yeah.
Like there's so many steps and so many layers that I do understand that hesitation to speak, and there should be a hesitation to speak. And we should look for ways to amplify one another's voice. Although I do try to speak now when I don't hear or just see any kind of Native presence. So if we're talking about water in Ferguson, then I'll try to say, people are fighting for water everywhere, and then try to retweet or try to include something that broadens the struggle, but kind of also shows that they are one and the same fight, that we're all fighting for kind of just space to live.
Yeah.
It's all true.
Yeah, Natives actually do that a lot, because when they talk about Flint, Michigan with the water, they say, well, out on the reservation. It's been going on forever.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that kind of that goes into the most recent issue, like with like, okay, let me rephrase this. I mean, there's a couple different discussions going on right now about like when we're doing that, it's speaking over or derailing from the community that, like, for example, for Flint, it's that when you're trying to echo the Flint crisis from a different perspective, that is speaking over it. And I mean, I know for me, that's kind of where I struggle in terms of like, well, yeah, I want to bring visibility to my community's issue, but I also don't want to make others feel like I'm speaking over them. You know what I mean? I mean, it's an accusation that's been thrown around a lot recently. So I mean, I don't know how to go about that. Like, I want to make the parallels, you know, because I think being able to say like, hey, like, you know, you're having this struggle, we're having this struggle too, like, let's bond together and, you know, tackle the struggle because it's coming from the same oppressor. I want to say that. But how you say it, it gets really complicated, especially nowadays. I'm sorry, I'm like half asleep at this point, so if I'm not making sense.
No.
I think you're making perfect sense, Kima, and I think that that's how insidious this entire system really is. The fact that we are having to fight with each other for notoriety, for the fact that we're all dealing with the same struggle. That's
right.
Disgusting. The fact that we all have to scream for scraps, and we're all screaming about the exact same problem, and no one is finding any solution because Whitey doesn't care. That's the problem. And so this is the true genius of this kind of dissension that they sow between us. Because if they get us fighting for scraps and fighting for just the tiniest hint of recognition, then what do they have to do? Nothing. Exactly. They don't have to do anything. We keep fighting each other. Nothing ever gets done.
I asked my dad about that once, growing up in LA, and seeing my dad grew up in Compton, so I would see Latinos and black folks fighting back and forth. I couldn't understand it as a kid because we're both going through, you know, racism and oppression. And I asked my dad, I was like, what the hell? Why is this happening? And he said it's pretty plain English for a kid to understand. It's kind of like two dogs fighting over scraps, like trying not to be on the bottom and just trying to be seen.
But also ensuring that you're not going to solve the problem because you are so focused on one another. Like you're so viciously attacking this other person who is like experiencing the same oppression as you. Like, that's why I tell black people everywhere in Texas, don't help them. Don't make yourself a part of this immigration debate. Don't let them co-opt your blackness in that way. Like, don't be that rubber stamp or that person who tells the dominant culture that we're gonna fight with one another and not critique them. Like, that is hard, but I also feel like that's where grace kind of comes in. So even when I see like a person of color that might say something maybe a little problematic, maybe use a statement that's overbroad, I try to either take that to them in private. That's why I'm so happy that so many of us are kind of gathering around the same kind of haunts so that we can have these private internal discussions, work things out between ourselves, and then present you know, a much more united face, you know, and people can still have their differences and people can still, you know, discuss the merits and nuances of different things without us attacking one another in ways that's actually detrimental to us.
I see it more as a sharing of information.
Absolutely.
You know, I don't see it as like one up and, okay, you had this happen, we had this worse happen. You know, I see it as you're listening, you're hearing what happened, you're hearing their story. Everybody has a story. And then you're saying, well, we went through it too, but the thing is, once you share all the stories, then you got to take the next step,
Right. Yeah.
And we need organizers to, you always need like a leader to, to say, okay, well, now what are we going to do? Just like with Trump, everybody, not everybody, but, a lot of the minorities are not for Trump. But what are we going to do about it? I mean, we're laughing at him or saying, oh, my goodness, he did this, he did that. But you got to organize,
Yep.
And the problem
I completely agree.
Well, yeah, they either killed off, exiled, or imprisoned those leaders you spoke of, and in the 60s and 70s.
There's a great documentary on how the killing of black leaders throughout the 60s and 70s kind of gives rise to like the Bloods and the Crips. Once you've decapitated this leadership and the community is kind of left with the anger and the hurt and all the needs that were still there before, kind of what happens when these movements kind of begin to disintegrate. I can't think of the name of that documentary, but I'd like to get it because I think that it is relevant how the dominant culture tries to play these two factions. There are differences between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, but they were ultimately fighting the same group. But if you read certain histories and certain narratives from that time, it's kind of like they had nothing in common, and that's just not true.
They intersected. When Malcolm was close to the end and Martin was close to the end, their beliefs kind of intersected.
Right. I always see Malcolm and Martin as like two sides of the same coin. Like they were like it was Black America saying, "Look, you're going to get A or you're going to get B. It's going to be A or B." And I still kind of feel that way. Like it's still going to be A or B.
I wanted to bring this up because you talking about Malcolm X, and I'm Black. I'm not Native. But I heard Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X say two very problematic things in different instances, and I otherwise loved them to death.
Just those two?
I'm using this as an example because as Black folks, we look to them as this like triumphant heroes, which I believe they are. But Malcolm once said that Black women are the most endangered people in the world. And Stokely once said, talking about white people, they exterminated the red man. They wanted to exterminate the red man, and they did it, and And he emphasized that point like about 3 or 4 times. Now,
I also heard that that Stokely quote does make me like, it gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah. I just want to get the Native people on this panel, like what when you hear something like that, and then some of the most intelligent Black folks you could think of, how does it make you feel?
Oh, extinction tropes. Extinction tropes are a wonderful thing. I mean, man, I think I don't want to say it was well intentioned. I think I get what he was saying in terms of like our oppressors did it well, like they oppressed us well, quote unquote. But I think what irritates me the most when people say those types of things or point back to like, oh well, natives being extinct or natives being there's no disclaimer that we're also survivors. Mm-hmm. And I get, it kind of ends up reminding me of like poverty porn. How people will latch on to like, oh, natives are so, oh God, I can't think right now. natives are so, struggling so much, et cetera, but we're also survivors. And I think this type of phrasing reiterates extinction tropes over and over and over and over again. So, yeah, I guess that's all for that.
With Malcolm's quote in particular, I think the quote that you're talking about is like the most disrespected person in America is the black woman.
Yeah,
that quote specifically, I do allow some room for us, and I mean both black and Native groups, to speak within the zone of our own experiences. So when it comes to superlative questions, I don't like them at all. Like I don't like for anybody to go, we're the most of this, because sometimes those numbers can be disputed. And honestly, I don't want to ever get into an argument about who is the most this or who is the most that. And so I feel like I almost have to just let both people speak, even though I do feel if I were to give it, I would honestly give it to Native people for who has it the worst in quote-unquote America. But how I arrived to that decision, it's almost hard for me to quantify, and I don't know how others are doing so either. And so I feel like that's almost one of the tools of the system to get you arguing about who has this worse or whose stat represents this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the extinction quotes, that's something completely different, and I do want that narrative to be deaded within the African American community in particular. Like, Natives are still here, they're resilient, they're just as strong and resilient as we are.
Well, I think for that, at that time, they may have thought that was true, because if you think about it, they put all the Natives on reservations, a lot of them. They took the children up until like the 50s, even the 70s, and they were in boarding schools. So you weren't seeing the Natives in public view, so I could see how he could arrive at that. And Natives were like, 12 million Native Americans, and, that number has been disputed. And now they're like 1 to 2% of the population. So, they did try to kill all the Natives. They didn't secede, but that was what they were trying to do.
That's a good point. One question or topic that and USC brought this up: the take a knee, take the knee, national anthem protest in the National Football League, and I felt pretty annoyed, and I'm not indigenous myself, but seeing black athletes in the NFL playing for Kansas City or Washington, with either a racial slur on level with the N-word on their chest with a caricature of a Native person, or of course your name the Chiefs on your jersey, yet you're protesting racism. What are the thoughts of the Native people on this roundtable on that?
Oh gosh.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very annoyed by that, and I don't know why the players. Let's interview them. Let's ask them their rationale for wearing a racial slur, but yet protesting the mistreatment of people in this country. I mean, that's pretty hypocritical.
Oh my God, it's so hypocritical. Listen, I grew up in the DMV my entire life, all right? Like, I lived in D.C., PG County, and Virginia, and, I mean, people here, like, in terms of the Washington team, the Redskins, they are diehard fans. And there's just nothing that you can say or do that's going to change their mentality a lot of the times. Like, I can't tell you how many discussions and arguments and fights even back in my rough and tumble days that I got into over, you know, the R word, the racial slur, like, and it's just like what I've come to find after all these years of, you know, trying to educate people and talk to them, it's just a dissonance they have. Like, the indoctrination is, and it's not an excuse, but the indoctrination here is so strong and so deep. Like, trying to reconcile that new information it's just not possible. And, like, I get it, right? You know, because sports are something that people bond over, especially when it comes to masculine solidarity. People really use it as, you know, a baseline connection. And they don't want to break that connection. They don't want to break the memories and things like that. So obviously they're going to reject it one way or another. I mean, I think it's like beating a dead horse at this point for me.
Yeah.
You know, I'm exhausted. I'm absolutely exhausted. I'm frustrated, and it's just like, you know what? Like, if you can't, especially in terms of right now, with all of these colonizer statues coming down, and, you know, the whole take a knee movement, like, if people can't see the parallels at this point, I don't know if it's going to be possible.
I honestly don't even think it's can't see. It's just won't see. It's just America lives in a very specific state of denial, and they adamantly refuse to be shaken out of that state of reason. And even for something as incredibly blatantly racist as either one of these teams, when we can come to them with scientific proof that they are harming and ourselves with these tropes, and they just don't care. It's just sort of we just don't care, because unfortunately at the very core of it, we aren't people to them. We still aren't, and that's the problem. And until that ceases to be a problem, this will be a
outstanding issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even think that, you know, if there was a Native American sitting in the stadium, they would even know one was there, because they expect them to come riding in on a horse with spears and a headdress and all that.
War paint. It's just,
and they look like that stereotype, but I think that they just don't get it.
No.
But the awareness is growing. I think what's going to happen is they're going to look back and they're going to see that shirt that they're kneeling in, and I think they will get it. But right now it's still a disconnect. And they also, they don't realize that the Washington team was the last team to allow black players. And even when they allowed black players, their families had to sit outside the fence to watch the player play. They weren't even allowed in. You know, so, I mean, just the history behind it. And,
it's all racist.
Yeah.
Do we know whether if you get signed, not that this would be an excuse, by the way, do we know that if you get signed to one of these teams, because I don't actually keep up with football, I just had to look up the example that Nolan gave of Kansas City. Do we know if you sign to one of those football teams, are you able to speak out legally against the team? Because I know, like, if you do that movie, you have to, like, go and promote the movie. Like, you can't badmouth the movie or anything like that.
Yeah, I don't think you'd want to jeopardize your job by doing it.
Look at what happened to Kaepernick.
Exactly.
An excuse, and it's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. I'm just thinking of, because I'm not as familiar with these.
Well, they're all being criticized, you know, now for taking the knee.
Colin Kaepernick said nothing and ended up not only losing his job, but will not be signed by another NFL team because he was the first one to do this. So
Jerry
none
Jones,
of them are going to.
everybody loves, like my family loves the Cowboys. Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, was giving an interview the other day that said, you know, the reason that they were taking the knee, they were doing so before the national anthem. And he was talking about if anyone did it during the national anthem, you know, they'd be off the team or whatever. And I know that for sports, for a lot of black people, they have viewed it. First of all, you've hit a genetic lottery if you make it to a professional team. It's like 1% of people. And so I know for a lot of black people that has been like an escape, at least for some of us. It's led even more of us down, you know, kind of even worse roads, honestly. But I honestly don't understand black people who are even still watching NFL games at this point in time. Like, the whole thing, it's always rubbed me wrong how it's kind of a little like gladiator sports. Like, everything's owned by these rich white men, even though 60–70% of the league is black. And I've always been made uncomfortable by that level of profiteering off black bodies, so to speak. But I would also, I would encourage any black person who is maybe just getting into like learning about mascots, learn about mascots, and then go watch like a music video like Jay-Z's 4/4. What's the name of that song? The Life of OJ, where he's using old Warner Brother cartoons and depictions of black people. See how racially stereotypical all of that stuff is, and then look at the history of mascots. Like, there's no way that you can differentiate the two.
Or if they look at blackface compared to the R word. Yeah. But I think the thing too is if you say something like, well, what if it was the N word up there? They'd be, oh no, you know. Right. So, and that's the racial slur for a black person. The racial slur for a Native American is the R word. So it's the same thing. You know, there's no way they would have the black skins or the N word up there.
Has a Native person bought, they probably already had. I just read an article about some black person who bought like the trademark to the N word, because there was that Supreme Court case that said that you could have racially pejorative things as like your trademark.
Oh yeah.
And so there was a black person that went and bought the N word basically to prevent anybody from doing that. But I guess we wouldn't be able to do it with the R word because the team would already own it.
So I'm really glad you brought that case up, because Exo Danny and I, we had literally a 3-day argument, 3 days straight, my friend, 3 days straight, with the Slants, who were the one. They're an Asian American band that went to court to get that rolling, the one that you're speaking of now. And we were trying to explain to them, like, dude, like, you didn't think about the repercussions this would have towards the indigenous community who have been fighting for literally generations, literally. And, you know, they try to frame it as, oh, but in the future.
No, they're aware.
They are. They're always aware. I love how they try to play it off like, oh, we didn't know. Yeah, you're not that ignorant.
No, yeah, no, they definitely knew. But they try to play it off like, oh, well, you know, maybe in the future, like, you guys can reclaim the word. And it's like, wait a minute, we don't want to reclaim it. We want it gone.
Right, we want,
This is not going to be like a lot of black people use the N-word, is that, you know, buddy things to greet each other. That's never going to be the R-word for Native people. It's not going to happen.
Well, the origin of the two words are different. As similar as our two people and our two struggles are, that is something that's very different. There was the word, the N-word was not created when, you know, to scalp black people. Right. You know, there's just a difference. There wasn't bounties that put on us with that word attached.
Well, that was the last word that a lot of black people heard if they were lynched. It's the word.
I mean, I'm not saying we weren't.
It didn't have a fuzzy history either.
But the name wasn't created in the same way. It's obviously the horrible. It was like we're monkeys, we're less than human. You know, we shouldn't belong on this planet. We're lucky that we do. So you know,
And black
But,
people's use of that word is totally not even, it's not even settled amongst us. There are black people who use it, there are black people who do not. Like, there's no agreement between us. So it always surprises me, like, when people feel that they can use any kind of racial pejorative and just be, I guess, just feel like it's going to be okay. Like, there's not even agreement amongst the people how it should be used. So, like, what makes you think that you can come in and use it?
Exactly.
that hit me hard because I'm still a football fan, and it hit me recently. Like, am I being too hard on, announcers or ex-friends of mine or whatever who still use the R word? It was like a 2-second thought, and I yanked it out of my head, threw it away. But I was thinking.
Well, you're just more aware of it now.
Well, yeah, but I was thinking of it because, wait a minute, these announcers, whatever, they went to college, the players who played for Washington, Hall of Famers, whatever, they've seen the protests outside their stadium for years and years and years and years. They know. Like Willie said, they don't want to know. And even that's the basis for this particular discussion. Even black people don't want to know. I've had discussions with loved ones about that word, and how it's like, it's as bad as our word, the N word. And no, it's not. But this is why. It's like, no, it's not. Okay.
Because once you know, like, then it's on you to, like, change something or to, like, change your perspective or to do something. Nobody wants to feel like that it's now on them to act. Like, nobody wants to feel like it's on them to act.
It's so much easier to live in denial.
Right.
Well, and I think it's like you said, easier to live in denial, but I think that is also easier than admitting you've been complicit in harmful behavior. Yeah, this entire time. And I can understand that. I can understand, like, nobody wants to feel like a crappy person. I get it. But at the same time, you have a choice. Like, when this information is presented to you, you have a choice. Do you want to continue being complicit and supporting your oppressor, or do you want to support the people around you that are fighting with you?
Right.
Like, it blows my mind, dude. It blows my mind. But that being said, I have to go to bed. I have a very long day at work tomorrow. But thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Kima.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye. You too.
Bye.
I think we are just about at that time. Started about 7:35 my time, so we've.
Do you think that there's any role, just really quickly, do you think that there's any role for black athletes in particular? I get the critiques of capitalism. I get the critiques of, well, just if there are black faces, in charge of things, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's an improvement. But do you think that there is some role for us to be kind of our own managers and have our own sports agents and maybe even our own teams, so that we can be more in charge of things of this nature? Like, on one hand, I don't think that it's going to necessarily change everything, but it's like, as long as our bodies are in the hands of other people, I feel like this is going to be a question that we have to revisit.
Well, it kind of goes with everything else. Like, you look at music, the way that we are tied to these contracts, and of late, like the last 10 or so years, you've had hip-hop artists say, I'm not signing with anybody. I'm going to be independent because I don't want to be, tied to these contracts where I have to do everything you say. And that, I mean, my favorite musical artist to this day is Nas. Also, his full name, Nasir Jones. And he came out with an album called Nigger. And when they came out, the company said, I think it was Sony at the time, there's no way in hell you were having that name on your album. But what do you mean? So he ended up having to take the word off and change the name. And I mean, it's a complicated question. I mean, I think the system has to go completely outside of different, like, smaller sects of whatever business or hobby or whatever it is that we are involved in. because like something like the Negro Leagues in baseball, as successful as that was in terms of the output on the field, that was never going to last. You know, the system has to go for us to have that feeling. I mean, I think the feeling that you're wanting, the same thing everybody on this roundtable wants, is this freedom, because we feel tied to something.
I think it will change because the minorities will soon be the majorities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's like what this Trump thing is all about. It's their last, the last gasp that
it is.
White,
it's their last ditch effort.
Yeah, exactly, because they know they're on their way out, and I mean they're getting a lot of pushback, and eventually there's going to be less of them and more of everybody else. You know, so things always get worse before they get better.
Yeah,
I think the question off that is, because I look at Africa, even though we have in technical terms control of many nations, we're still colonized, which in air quotes, we're still beholden to capitalism and a Western societal view of democracy. So when we become the majority in this country, people of color, do we, all right, no more of this, capitalism gone, you know, this republic gone, or do we go, no, this is it's too much work, let's just stay with this?
I feel like it depends on who's in charge, because a lot of the people in Africa, the leaders of Africa, as much as they might critique Western civilization, a lot of them, especially I'm thinking about Francophone Africa now, a lot of those leaders, they spend, if you look at their schedules, they spend a disproportionate amount of time in France, because the French government gives them money and gives them access, and, you know, they're not there to conjugate their verbs or practice the French language. They're there because those powers keep them in power, because they know that that's the surest way to assure this resource extraction. So I feel like it depends on who's in power and who's benefiting from that person being in power.
I think that you can't reinvent the wheel. And we know already from experience that nothing that has been done that centers around colonization is successful. So the systems that are built on hierarchy are made to oppress someone. And as long as you are oppressing someone, it's going to fail. So until we can get to a place where people are not being oppressed, where everyone's taken care of, or it's more of an egalitarian society, it's not going to work. How do we get there from here?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's the question. And it's not one that everybody's going to agree on, because it's going to come with a lot of huge changes, and there are a disproportionate amount of people that are really uncomfortable with the idea of change, because change is scary.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, look at the Black Lives Matter movement. That took off. You know, every white person knows what Black Lives Matter is, even though they like to spin it like they like to say it's a hate group. You know, but the reality, it became because of the hate against them. You know, but they don't like that because they're speaking up.
Yep.
Well, it goes to the change is scary. How dare you change the name of my football team?
Right.
So you have to tear the root out, not, you know.
What is so strange about the decision between people who are no longer here and the people that we have to live and die with here today? Like, the options are like, it's not even a question for me. I would so much rather come to understanding and be in solidarity with the people who are here today than to hold on to like these images of the past, like these Confederate monuments, these team names that are just antiquated and racist and evil. Like, but I think that comes from being black.
On.
I think they want to be in power. They want to.
Yes.
the Confederacy.
I feel like for Native and Black people, the future is a space that we might be able to own and collectivize and theorize about more freely than other people. And so, I don't know, maybe there are these groups that just feel like this is all they have. And I don't
My theory is they are afraid that we're going to do to them what they did to us.
Exactly. That's the exact root of their fear and I think that's the root of their fear in so many things. That the Native groups and the Black groups and the Latino groups and the Asian groups and all of these groups that they have spent literally generations and centuries oppressing are finally going to wake up and band together and go, hey, we don't like this. And we haven't liked this. And we've never liked this. So now it's your turn. They know, because they've always known what they've been doing, and they know how bad it is, and they know that they never want to be on the receiving end of that, and that has been their fears. One day, going to wake up and be on the receiving end of the things that they have been giving for centuries. And that is and that is the creation of Donald Trump.
Right.
Yeah, and I think
that's exactly why Donald Trump is popular.
I think all this gun militias and now the sale of guns is going wild and all that. I don't think they're afraid of the government taking over. I think they're afraid of minority people.
Yes, absolutely.
They don't want minorities having guns, but they want to have white militias and all these groups and individuals having all these firearms.
Which is exactly why they have ever labeled a white male a terrorist, even though that's who is doing committing the terrorist acts on U.S. soil. White males with the arsenal of weapons.
Right.
And even
it's not brown people.
This
and it's
latest
not
guy
black people.
This latest guy had like 47 guns. Like who has that many firearms?
Just by himself. So
who has that many nuclear weapons?
Right. It's white people creating that kind of nonsense. White people creating that violence because they are afraid that again one day they're going to wake up and the check's going to come due. And they're finally going to have to experience the violence that they have been perpetuating and perpetrating on everyone else.
I would like to propose a question that if all we wanted was revenge, that we could have, sought it well before now. I guess there's something to say about waiting in the future when we have greater numbers. But I also want to encourage Native and Black youth who might be listening to, educate yourself and, be a good person. It's not your responsibility to take on the fears and anxieties of this society that a lot of times are kind of irrational and are a lot of times geared towards avoiding conversations that are unavoidable. The history is what it is. We're going to have certain conversations, and there are going to be certain perspectives. And I feel like as a Black person, I'm often pressured into assuming a form that is the least threatening to the dominant culture, even though I don't have a history of, lynching people or of all these other types of things. And I just don't want Native and Black kids to think that it's their job to square that circle necessarily. Be a good person and live in a way that is honorable, but we didn't cause this.
Completely agree.
We're not causing it even still, and even that situation and horror in Las Vegas became allegedly anti-Black when it was said that, wait a minute, what about Wounded Knee? I'm like, well, from my standpoint, I was like, yeah, what the hell? Why aren't we talking about Wounded Knee? And then, so, well, that's anti-Black because what about all this and this and that?
I feel like it's anti-Indigenous and anti-Black to even label most modern shootings as the biggest anything. Like, there's a source book, and it's called Documenting American Violence. You can get it on Amazon, and it just documents like 500 years of like American violence, like of just like violent episodes through American history. Like, educate yourself if you think that this is like the most massive anything.
Well, and Native people and Black people both know white people are violent. We've known that forever. This is not new. This is not news. We know.
We have to even see that people are surprised. Like, when has this not been happening?
Well, it's the mirage.
It was just a matter of time before it would happen.
What happens every day? I mean, there's a mass shooting just about every single day.
Yeah.
And
we're almost immune to it.
Yeah. And the sick thing is that it makes my head spin when I think about the fact that Native and Black people aren't the ones with the firearms in the post office or the movie theater or, you know, a crowded square in Las Vegas because of the edges of insanity that we're pushed to every single day for the last 500 plus years. Yet it's the ones in power and privilege that go.
But that speaks to our character. That speaks to who we really are at our core. That, like, the people who have the most cause to be angry do not and should not be reacting in these ways.
That's inhumane. I mean, I always say I don't blame. Like when the Baton Rouge thing happened, I think it was a Dallas shooting of policemen also. I don't blame a Black or Native person if they kill a police officer. I'm not going to go do it myself. I'm not going to call for that, but I freaking get it. You know?
Yeah, I understand it too.
I understand the anger, but yeah, like you said, like I'm never going to call for that or like. But I understand to me, that's a different type of anger and rage. And it stems, honestly, from our culture's inability to deal with certain issues. Like, it amazes me how long America can be in denial. Like, I think it amazes other countries. Like, other countries, I think, look at this place and go, how do you remain in such a state of denial for so long?
Yeah, I think part of that's kind of a colonial construct, though. I don't think America is the only one that's in that deep of a denial, because I think there are plenty of other countries that are colonial constructs that are in just as deep a denial when it comes to the genocide that they perpetrate against other nationalities. So
I think if it's
I don't think that
genocide is current, then the people of that country have rose-colored glasses on. But like Germany, for example, because that's like the only genocide Western society recognizes as genocide in history, they actually teach the Holocaust to their children in schools.
Yeah. See, in America, they're trying to erase it.
Yeah. Exactly. It's funny because there were more Russians that were killed in World War II than Africans killed in any African conflict post-World War II. So, like, we often think about Africa as this, like, place where genocide can, and of course those things have happened. Those things are a part of Africa's history. We often, ignore the colonial powers' role in those things, but we don't oftentimes look at, like, this, even like the 1,000 years of European history prior to, contact there's a lot of death and a lot of murder and a lot of white-on-white crimes.
Well, that's why they went to Turtle Island. Because
they brought it. They wanted to spread it around.
Right, spreads violence.
Well, if you go to other countries, they speak all different languages, and it's kind of like more diverse. When in America, you got the ghettos, you got the reservations. It's like they want to keep everybody separate.
Yep, segregation.
Yeah, and keep any immigrants out, keep Muslim people out, and put up walls and just keep what we have here. Just keep them in cages, and then everybody else keep them out.
That's not how Africa was before white people. It's not how Turtle Island was before white people. It's
not even how Europe was with white people, so
right.
where they got this romanticized. just how everything was going to fall into place and how society was going to be structured.
Because when they came here and were able to view themselves as a collective identity. So now they're not only just German, French, or they can be collectivized as white people now that they have this the system of stratification that, you know, puts natives in a certain place and puts black people in a certain place.
Yes.
No, that's true. Because we had our, you know.
Just to interject, all Germans aren't white people.
Oh, that's true. But not, that's a good point. That's the colonized thinking of, like, thinking race is such a simple concept, even though it's a artificial construct.
Well, the Germans like to think they're all white, so it's common thing. So.
We still haven't gotten any reparations for being in the Holocaust, even though everyone thinks only, you know, white Jewish people were in the Holocaust.
And I'm fine with them even getting the most center, since there were so many, you know, Jews killed. But we could. I was thinking about just American history. I was taught, like, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade for me were all pretty much about World War II in history class. And then I went on to high school where it also represented a disproportionate amount of kind of like the subject matter. And I was just thinking of ways that we could reorganize. Like, I feel that white conservatives, men who typically end up teaching history, love that period because a lot of times they have, like, you know, their dads or, you know, family members who fought in those periods, and the narrative allows them to kind of be the heroes. But American history needs to be restructured so that we spend a lot more time talking about the things that happened here. I'm not saying that that's not an important part of history. I don't regret having to, you know, read Elie Wiesel and, you know, Anne Frank. Those are important parts of history, but I kind of feel like there needs to be a year, you know, dedicated to slavery, a year dedicated to, you know, native dispossessment of land and colonization. Like, there's more than enough for American students to study on those two topics that would cover a year, and maybe our population would just be more educated. But we're spending too much time on narratives that allow us to look like the savior of the world, and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, even within the Holocaust itself, like, the only people that mattered in that were white people. No one talks about the atrocities the Japanese committed against other Asian people.
Right.
Nobody talks about the other people in the Holocaust. Black people, there were tens of thousands of black people. Nobody knows how many of us were killed by Hitler. We were the #1 target of the sterilization program. We were segregated from Jewish people in the camps. So even Hitler's like, Jewish people the worst, Jewish people the worst. Well, we were treated worse than Jewish people in the camps. And you know,
and people with disabilities too. If you were handicapped or anything, you were
homosexual, Romanian. It's only, you know, it's just like the narrative that still exists to this day. If you're white, cisgendered, straight, and a male, then you matter so much. You're such a precious entity.
Well, you know, the schools cover Native Americans like in kindergarten, you know, and they touch on it in 1st grade. And then, you know, they're done.
Right.
They move on to other things. You don't learn about it as your brain gets older. You know, you don't learn about 7th or 8th grade. You know, they'll say, oh, you did that in kindergarten. We're done. You know, so.
Exactly.
Even if they do have to mention it at all, it's always tied up with Columbus and how much of a hero he is.
Mm-hmm. Even
it's always the natives fed the pilgrims and we were discovered, you know.
We learn about slavery pretty young as well. I don't remember what grade I learned about slavery, but even the way we teach about slavery as though it was this one undifferentiated thing is very erroneous. It usually leaves out Native American slavery. We talk about it as though it kind of started at the chattel level and was that all across time. And that was it for a good majority of the time. But when you go through and actually break down slavery through the generations, you're actually able to see the society progress and like these social caste systems solidify over time, you don't learn anything about that. And that's by design.
I don't even remember learning about slavery in school.
So, well, some parts of the country don't even teach it anymore. And
right.
Even when I learned about it, it was whitewashed. I didn't know how horrific it was, but I did know how horrific the Holocaust were. I did know how horrific a Union soldier's life was, you know, or a soldier in the Revolutionary War. If it's white folks, especially if it's white men, that's what matters. Even the suffragette movement and the feminist movement in the 60s.
Yeah.
It was inherently racist, and all those women get propped on pedestals while, you know, black and indigenous women were just cast aside. Right. Even Susan B. Anthony herself, you could just find what she said about black women publicly.
That whole movement is kind of based on the blacks got the right to vote, so now we have to have the right to vote. You know, of course everyone is for women's suffrage, but to base it on that principles is inherently racist.
Especially since so many of us couldn't vote then and still can't vote now.
Right.
It's like it's a problem. We can have an honest conversation with white America because their narrative is so skewed in their favor, and they think that favor is correct, even though it's inherently propaganda. But I think we should save some of this for next week, and I thoroughly enjoyed the hour. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Same.
Yeah, thank you, Wyatt.
You all have a good week, and I hope to see and hear you all again in a week's time.
Same here.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Take care, everyone. See you next week.
Sounds good.
All right.